10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
0.
Spróbuj moich cukierków, Krzyśki, o smaku czekolada chili, dostępne tylko w sklepie SFD. Użyj kodu 0 i zamów taniej.
Partnerem kanału jest XTB. Aplikacja inwestycyjna, z którą zaangażujesz do pracy Twoje pieniądze.
Z kartą Zen. Zapomnij o elektronice, która psuje się zaraz po zakończeniu gwarancji.
Cechini muszyna. Naturalny magnez i wapń. Pij najlepsze minerały.
Partnerem kanału Zero jest producent boskich kiełbas bez osłonki JBB Bałdyga. Jedz bardziej bosko.
Najnowszy magazyn Zero już dostępny. Wyzwania władzy i polityki. Generał Rajmund Andrzejczak i profesor Sławomir Dębski o nowym prezydencie Polski. Zamów na magazyn.zero.pl.
Please welcome all these two gentlemen. So now it's time for a little bit longer introduction. Over here, we see United States flag with 50 stars there, waving on the White House. We decided to add today 8 stars to these 50 over there. We invited to these panels 2 4-star generals. General Scaparrotti requires no introduction, but let me say in a few words. Former SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, US Commander for Europe, commanding US troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, and also supervising commanding US troops in South Korea. One of the most experienced American commanders. Sir, thank you for your time. Thank you for accepting our invitation. General Rajmund Andrzejczak, former Polish Chief of Defense, 4 stars general, with the combat experience in Iraq and in Afghanistan. A man who actually fulfilled obligation, allied obligation, to come with her help and aid after September 11. He fought hand in hand with American allies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then, as a Polish Chief of Defense, he was contributing and strengthening Polish-American military alliance. So it is hardly to imagine better members of the panel, which is supposed to talk about military perspective military perspective in conversation about the alliances, how they work, what contribution they make to the strength of the United States, Poland, Europe, and global peace, what can be done to make this structure more effective, more combat ready, and actually more capable to protect our common good, which is peace. Having said all of that, and there is one kind of the explanation, only this session is off the record. So remember, this session is off the record. You can see cameras over there. So be careful. Next session will be off the record, but this one is exceptional. Let me pass the floor to General Raymond Andrzejczak. And I would like to ask him about his perspective first. You were sent to Iraq and then to Afghanistan. There is a kind of the public discussion in which the term distinction between wars of ours and theirs are being quite often implemented and used. So can you share with us your experience as a soldier sent to Iraq and Afghanistan? How was your interpretation of your role and function there? And from this perspective, how you assess our Polish-American alliance?
Not easy. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Big pleasure to be in such a unique and beautiful place. And the combat, I think, Scap, you agreed, there are a few factors which matters. Timing, place of battle, and also formation. So today, everything is perfect. Location, no better place. Timing, also very important. A lot of important things around the world. Globally, but also in Poland, we are just right after presidential elections. The president of Poland plays a significant role in the security, and there's a new chapter coming. So I think timing is perfect, and formation is absolutely unique. So the last time we've been together in the combat, Scap was my divisional CJTF 82nd commander, the famous All-American 6.
White Eagle 6.
I was always having problems to pronounce my name, so I was White Eagle 6. And that's a big pleasure, Scap. Thank you very much for your contribution here. And well, the alliances, they have two dimensions, I think. One will be very much human and emotional. A second thing is purely strategic, having no emotions. So I will start with the emotions. The difference between Poland and the United States, well, I'm always repeating, traveling around the globe, it's you are sailors and we are farmers. So, philosophically, you're always deploying your instrumentarium somewhere else because your interests are somewhere else. And Poland is very much locally oriented historically, so our approach is very much, Poland-centric, Polish-centric, and also, in the region, neighborhood. So for me, going to Iraq was like a farmer being sailor one day. So what I'm doing over there, it was of course mission. Okay, I prepare myself, I prepare soldiers. So first time I was J3, someone who was responsible for everything, for planning, for operations. And then that was the most difficult mission in my life. It was Afghanistan, and again in the other side of the globe. So from a soldier's perspective, everything matters. Someone in the left, in the right, in the flank, in the front and in the back. So operating and fighting with Americans was absolutely perfect. The same understanding, the same, sharing the same values, and always being on time, no matter what kind of flag you have here. I remember the situations when there was in the CGTA 5 brigades that time. One was Polish, and there was no difference. Absolutely, the same missions, the same risks, the same support. So I really felt like in the family. And of course, many times when I'm in Poland and I say, which is very much emotional, very much personal, I lost 11 soldiers. And Poles, they asking, okay, for the 5th rotation you commanded, we lost 7. And I said 7 Polish and 4 Americans. So I have 11 soldiers that I lost in the combat because there's no difference. When I came back to Poland, it was also very much difficult for Poles to understand what we're doing in Iraq, what we're doing in Afghanistan. But before we go, let's shift in the history back a little bit in 1989 when we finally started transformation and the Soviet army was leaving. We had 2 important strategic objectives, which was joining NATO and joining European Union. So to fulfill the missions, you need to be a credible alliance, someone who is trustful. So from a political point of view, so we're going to, not to emotional, but we're going to very much strategic or even political dimension. That was a good decision to go to Iraq and to go to Afghanistan. Probably there will be no discussion in such a place today without the joining Poland to NATO in 1999. So alliances matters very much, but now we are in the position that that's what missing in the discussion. Now it's interesting to say my vision here in close to White House. Although we have the same, we're sharing the same values and we're going in the same direction, the national interests are slightly different. So for US, the most important threat right now you're facing is China. So all of you potential, you have to relocate for many reasons to the different theater, which makes sense. And of course, when I remember when the first Trump, in the first presidency, Trump said to a certain state of head of states in Brussels, we should do what we agree, 2% GDP, and you know the story. So today, the shifting U.S. attention to the Pacific is strategically, understood. However, for Poland, is different. So we know Russia for a couple of good years. They have still the same objectives. We see what they're doing, and not only today in Ukraine, but also in Georgia, many other places. So now we have to build a platform for discussion, how to mitigate some kind of, conflict of interest or differences in the interest. U.S. shifting attention to the Pacific needed some kind of assistance. And also Polish national interest, which is Russia first. This is our existential threat for Poles, for Estonians, for Latvians, Lithuanians. So, well, Slavik, it's difficult for me because emotionally there was not my war. Iraq and Afghanistan was far away, never happened in history. If you're going to Warsaw to the Piłsudski Square, you see the monument of unknown soldiers and you see the names and dates. You see places in Russia or in the western directions, a few as well. But there was no global, battles for Poland. It happened. So, well, we need a platform to mitigate and discuss how to fix the problem when we have a slightly different interest concerning Russia right now, and to still to keep strong alliance, because without alliance you cannot win any battle.
Thank you very much, Ray. Now I would like to ask Scap. Achieving 4 stars level means collecting experience. Each star is responsible, is kind of the symbol of different unique experience, tactical, operational, strategic, and also working with the allies. Through all your career, you worked with allies. I have a very simple question to you. What does it mean to be a good ally?
Well, I think first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here with the Polish International Affairs Institute here. It's a pleasure to be here, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for your comments. I'll start, Slavik, with first his comments, because I think it's important, and that is, how important is an ally or an alliance, and what does it really mean? He and I have a friendship that goes beyond the norm because of what we experienced together. And that's true throughout the transatlantic and our military. So we may have each of the countries over time, having been the SAC year, there's always political differences. But the military folks drive on. We have a bond, we have a mission that flows from that policy as a united one, and we're going to get that job done together. And Raymond and I have a close relationship because of that. I have a box on my desk at home. On the top of it's engraved the words "Make it matter." In that box is a picture of every soldier that I lost in Iraq. And in that box are Polish soldiers. So, you know, it's just a reminder of the price of freedom and the sacrifice that's been made. And that's a good description of an alliance. Now, let me go to the strategic level on this. Because the best way for me to say this is that if you look through history of warfare, it's generally not the one nation, maybe the central nation, that wins the war. It's generally that central nation and who has the best and most allies. The allies play a crucial role. They did in World War I, they did in World War II, they did in Korea and Vietnam, they did in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? They empowered the United States in those and their ability to carry the day. And today, our allies and partners, in my view, are a strategic advantage. And in a world, a multipolar world now, with emerging technologies, and more importantly, the cooperation between China and Russia in an unlimited partnership, as they call it, and including Iran and DPRK, the United States more than ever needs its allies. So our alliances are in support of our vital national interest. To me, it's as simple as that. When you come to experience, for me, when I was a captain, I deployed in Reforger as a member of the 82nd Airborne Division. When I was a major, I deployed to Reforger as a member in 10th Mountain on Reforger. I served then later in both Iraq and Afghanistan within NATO commands. And I was a NATO commander in Afghanistan on both of those occasions. Throughout my career, I've been, from the time that I was a colonel, and each of my general officer jobs, I deployed the command that I had someplace overseas in combat most often, 1, 2, 3-star, and 4-star. So that's been my life. I mean, that has been the way we operate, and it's been my experience. Now, what did I learn? First of all, it's a human endeavor, as it always is in our profession, right? So the first thing I learned is you've got to understand the capability that each other brings to the effort. Sometimes politically, we determine here what the missions ought to be, but those in the field understand that the capability is not necessarily aligned with the mission. And whenever we got that wrong, we had a problem. So within an alliance, you need to be careful about the capabilities and the alignment of the proper missions with that. You know, you and I wrestled with this all the time to make sure that we got it right and we could get the mission done and protect our troops. So that's kind of the first one I think about as I go through this. Understand each of the alliances and their allies' challenges. As a commander twice of allied forces, understanding my subordinate commanders' challenges, their mission, the perspective that they had, because remember, he reported back to Poland too, not just to me. Okay, and he had national responsibilities. Many times directed Minister of Defense. That's right. Direct phone calls. I got direct phone calls from.
The only field commander that spent 1 year in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Not half a year, but
1 year
long in Afghanistan.
Yeah. And I talked to your minister as well. That's right. But I think we have to keep that in mind as commanders as well, because if you don't, it creates friction within the command. And then, you know, the third one is just trust. And that's the coin of the realm, particularly in our build. You've got to be able to build that trust that you can deploy your force and commit the mission. A little story I tell in other places. In Iraq, working with the Polish brigade just south of Baghdad, we had a mission. I was Assistant Division Commander for 10th with 1st Armored Division, and I took a portion of our force south and worked with the Polish force on a mission. It's a clearance operation. And so we did, the United States, we did our normal order, and we said, okay, here's the formal, there's OPCON, and there's TACON and all this. And General Bieniak was commanding your forces. So we had a meeting, and I said, here's the support requirements and everything. And he kind of looked at me, and I think I don't know to this day, but I think it was, given national, you couldn't really sign up to the things that we had assigned in the verbiage and sign that order. And so he said, well, Scap, he said, you have op-con and take-con, and I've got yes-con and no-con, which I've never forgotten. Then he just reached across the table and said, what do you want me to do? And I told him, and he just shook my head, and he said, it'll happen. And that's what I mean by trust.
Thank you very much for underlying this emotional, personal bond of any allies. Thank you also for enhancing capabilities, that different allies contribute different capabilities and all are needed to fulfill the mission. Now we are, I would like to take this point as a point of departure to my next question. We are all concerned about our common alliance, about NATO. We want to make it stronger, reliable, effective in deterrence, if needed, effective in defense. So my question to both of you would be, what kind of capabilities would make our common alliance stronger? So Ray, if you can add and respond to this question from the Polish perspective, what capabilities Poland needs to make and to become or to be a stronger ally within NATO? And Scap, the same. What capabilities NATO needs?
So it's from first look is a question. So we can talk 3 hours with Scap about the long-range fires, new technologies, satellites, artificial intelligence, autonomous platforms, and so on. But it's completely useless because still, that's a discussion also we have with Sławek, with you and Ground Zero. First is the answer for question how to deter Russia and how to fight them. Not necessarily how many drones or how many platforms we need. So this is the question about the strategy. First is to prevent, to be successfully, effective in deterrence, and then going to the fight. Sometimes I get like simplification, but if you look in certain capability, F-35, U.S. one, and then to Israeli F-35 and Japanese F-35 and Polish, which are just Polish pilots are being trained here in the U.S. first pilots. You have 4 different airplanes because the strategy matters. So and the national caveats, matters. For Israeli F-35s going across Syria, and suppressing air defense and then flying and hitting Tehran. Theoretically and tactically, it's simple mission, but it requires different strategy and different policy of certain state. The same for Japan or for Polish F-35s. What we observed recently in the Ukraine, absolutely spectacular drone attack on the Russian strategic bombers, which are technically nothing special, just a few trucks with containers and a few drones. But it requires political guidance and then intelligence planning. So before we go to the capabilities, I will elevate a little bit more the question whether we have the same understanding of strategy, how to defend, how to deter Russians effectively, or I would say the most diplomatic soldiers word is proactively, how to prevent Russians to do what we don't like it, and talk in alliances, but it will be different perspective from Tallinn, from Warsaw, and maybe from Berlin or from Paris.
Okay, so here is
strategy first.
Interesting point I would like to press you a little bit more on. Should we have a capabilities which contribute to our own deterrence against Russia, or should we rely on the United States only?
This is a perfect discussion because as I said, we have to keep in mind that this is a different world, a different NATO, different the global situation. And if we take the U.S. interest shifting to Pacific, we have to consider how to solve, not how to criticize and to cry every day, but just to Article 4. We have to invest in our own capability. As we agree many years ago, 10%, 2%, which is history, come on, we're talking about 5% today. Can you imagine the change? That's the measurement of change, from 2% up to 5%, or maybe 3.5, or whatever. And then is a time to sit down and say, well, we offering that capability, we offering that kind, and also to share our understanding, about the strategy, how to effectively and proactively deter Russia from the different directions. I think we have enough capability, enough technology. Money are coming. Of course, it's a matter of time, because having money is not enough. So you need some time for production.
So the same question to you. Would you like to have European allies more capable in deterring Russia? And what capabilities should they have?
Well, first of all, he hit it on the nose about, Article 4. Everyone in the alliance has their own responsibility to be aware of their security, to make that known, and to have their own defense.
That's Article 3.
Capable defense. Yeah, Article 3 and then 4. I think that's fundamental. Secondly, when you talk about that, this idea of interoperability, we throw that word around a lot, but it's absolutely necessary. It's absolutely necessary that we have systems that connect. Today, in the way that we fight, if we want to harness emerging technologies, we have to be able to communicate, and we have to be able to transfer technology at speed, data at speed. We have to be able to connect sensors, systems, people, etc. That really is an asymmetric advantage for us, to the extent that we can do that. So that is, I think, very important to us as well. A little story. When I was the SAC hero, we began putting the battle groups onto the eastern flank, right? When we first did that, if you remember, each of those had like 5 or 7 nations in them initially, as they started up. Well, what you found when I went out to see them and get them set is that you had 5 or 7 different supply lines running to every battle group, because they had all kinds of different they had different radios. Some of them had the same radios, but because of the manufacturing and the national contract, even the same radio didn't talk to each other. I mean, it was a nightmare. That's the extreme. Now, since that time, because of that experience, we learned a lot and started repairing a lot of these things over the year. But that's what happens if you just come together and you haven't thought about it in advance. Now, if you want to know what I think about what capabilities we need, I'll hit them quick. You got to be able to see, decide, defend, and then also kill if you're an alliance like this. We got to be prepared to do our job. And to me, there's some fundamental things that we need to get after in a large way. So seeing. We need, as an alliance, to make sure that we've got proper ISR. The United States provides a good deal of that, and, depending on what this reduction may be, that could be a significant part of this. But Europe has begun to work on that, but they need to do that as well. There are countries, Poland's one of them, that has some exquisite capability that reinforces that, but we need to look at it and make sure that it's full. The deciding has to do with command and control. We call it JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control. You can call it whatever you want, but it's a capability to connect our forces, to communicate, and to connect all of our senses and exchange data at speed. Because, again, that's the way we intend to fight. If you look at the concept of ops for NATO and the alliance, that is our concept of operation fundamentally. So we haven't fully developed that. The technology's here. I've seen it. I work with business now. I know we have the technology to do what needs to be done. Governments we all need to make hard decisions that it's more important to share than it is to protect, right? Because we all want to protect our own data first, and then what we end up with is the need to design a black box so that he and I can talk together or send data between each other. The next one is air and missile defense. Look at what just happened, and deep into Russia. That can happen to us, too, here in the United States or in Poland. Then you've got ballistic missile defense. You've got the complexity of drones. the changing character of war has at this point changed the ability to defend in terms of air and missile defense, and our ability to control airspace. Fundamentally, it's very complex now, and we need to get serious about it because it has changed. Long-range precision fires, including drones, which provide that now. I heard the Ukrainian dad speak yesterday, and if I got him right, he said that 80% of the casualties they inflict are caused by drones. Think about that a minute. That's phenomenal. So those are the things that we need to focus on too, because the character of war has changed. And if we have to fight, we've got to be able to fight in that changed environment.
If I may say just one word, I don't want to, especially political level, to be relaxed, because immediately once we go to the certain military capability, they feel, relaxed and say, well, that's the soldier's job. I would say resilience also is one of the elements how to be effectively, ready. And that's the capability. If you have a production line, 155 ammo or 124 Abramses, it is deterrence by itself. So production line and capability, ability to, in a peacetime crisis and war, for production is absolutely crucial. So not only military capability we see in the combat platforms, but entire, sustainment as well as education. I just asking myself, maybe conscription in a certain country will be deterrence as well, because if they say, well, you have a social, agreement, you have economical ability and affordability, and also political guidance, so we have a social readiness to defense. So maybe conscription would be kind of a new military capability, or going back to the conscription we know from the past with some kind of modifications. So well, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, Ukraine and others are a good example of that resilience through their whole of government approach here. What I wanted to bring up was the industrial piece of this. In terms of industrial development, there's a lot of focus on that today, and rightfully so, because that's part of our resilience. If you look at the rate of fire, the depth of destruction in what we're watching in Ukraine, the speed of innovation, all of that means that our industrial capacity has to be able to meet that speed of war, to be able to meet that type of environment. None of us, to include the United States, really are ready for what it would be if we were in a fight with Russia. We need to be very serious about getting some depth in our industrial capabilities. Now in Europe, for instance, the EU just recently did the ReArm, which is, I think, over 800 million euro and another 150 million euro toward development. But the EU also put restrictions on who could take part in that. And I'm just here to say that I don't think that's the way we need to go. I don't think that Europe can build their defense industry at the speed they need to build it and be ready without help from others. And it's good for our industry as well, or Korea's, et cetera, to come in and help as well, for at least the initial years to get up on step. Poland is a good example of this. Poland has their primes who work with American companies to make helicopters. They have MROs there. That's the kind of co-production that we're talking about, and American business is ready to do that, to come to work under European primes and their people being employed, but using our technology, giving our part and play in that to make it happen. And I would encourage that we do it, because everyone in the transatlantic needs this type of speed in order to meet the environment that we're facing today.
Thank you very much. I will open the floor for a few questions in the minute. So please prepare yourself to ask questions to the gentleman. But there is also one additional issue I would like to ask them before that. Alliances is a tool to provide peace and security to the people. That's the mission of NATO. What we can do, I mean, the leaders, political class, military commanders, to bring these people on board, to explain them that alliances do matter, and they really are really effective in deterring threats and providing peace and security to our citizens. Right.
Well, some education needed, but also context matter. So please keep in mind the last time there was an article, Professor Elliot Cohen, absolutely perfect description about. He called it ghosts of a past. So every nation has some ghost. For example, Poland, the partitions, and then with the alliances, 1939, and then when UK and France, they not come in our understanding as credible alliances. Then we had the occupation, communism time. So for Finns, they have some ghosts as well, going to the Winter War, and of course Estonians or in the Baltic states. So if you're talking about the alliances, immediately goes to certain nation, historical context. So I think Scap, the generation remembering Reforger is not so. We are still young anyway, but the people that they understand, they remember the Russian threat are gone a little bit, and in Poland as well, they remember Iraq and Afghanistan more because they have brothers, sisters, fathers, some family stories. And in US, I don't know how it works. So the education of population that we spent 35 good years in Poland since 1989 when the transformation started. It was absolutely perfect time where we are today. We got the money for F-35s because we were, working hard. But to explain society, it's a matter of language, it's a matter of techniques you use. I think we have to educate, calibrate the language, calibrate the educational system to explain. If you're not spending 2% or 5%, you're going to spend 10 or 20. Look in the Ukrainians, they're spending 50% because they know that's the price of freedom. That's the price of fighting Russia. So I think we need some huge educational program to explain society. It doesn't matter where you're from, Portugal or Spain or Latvia or Poland. You have to understand what the real threat is.
Scap?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that how we educate our young is a part of this, in terms of the conflicts we've been involved in and why, and what the importance of alliances are, et cetera. I referred to history when I opened my talk here a second ago. I think the other thing is that across the transatlantic, we need to do a better job of explaining the threat, and we need to do a better job of explaining the importance of the alliance and what it brings. Because an alliance isn't just a military alliance. I mean, when you look at what is discussed in the North Atlantic Council, for instance, you go beyond the military piece. You get into the the diplomacy, the economic, the information campaign, because all of that's important in today's world. They can't avoid it, and so it's interconnected in many ways. And we do a fine job here in D.C. We have these panels, we've got the think tanks and those things, but we've got to get out into the hinterland in the United States more than we do, outside of the Beltway, to make sure that people understand that these alliances are a response and a way to protect our own vital interests globally.
Okay, so now is Q&A time. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Dan Jurgen from I'm Dan Jurgen from S&P Global. Would like to ask you to go back to the existential threat, Russia, and just ask you both how you just would assess the Russian military overall today and what we've learned about it from where we would have been in January of 2022.
We're doing lightning round here. My name is Antonia Ferrier. I'm a longtime Republican strategist, whatever you want to call it. I have two comments and a question. One on communicating with the people. I think there's a good model, which is the Germans through the MSc have done this Zeitenwende. They've done these town halls around Germany. I think they're a good model to think about when trying to sell the need. They have focused in the eastern, the former GDR, which is obviously where they have the most challenges in terms of Russia. So that's just one observation of a model to think about in other countries in Europe. Secondly, on the question of guns and butter, as you go west, if you ask the average person, do they guns or butter, they're going to choose butter. That's just what it is. Which leads me to sort of my point, and something I would like your input on, is that economic growth is everything, right? You have to have that be a part of the defense conversation. And frequently in a lot of security contexts, we hear from really smart people like yourselves, but if people's standard of living and their jobs are not getting better, it's going to be a harder sell. Not that it's not a sell, and in Poland it's a much easier sell. You're right on the border. So I would just urge you all to maybe think about how to bring in some of the economic reforms that are needed in Europe to spur more capital investment. And lastly, on that same sort of point about capital markets union, I know is complicated, but I really think this is essential because you all should take American money investment. There are startups, to your point, they want to invest, make it easier for them to do that. Take American investment money. We want to do that. We want to invest in Poland, for example. So I would say if there's a way to spur that, it's good for your economy, because if your economies are growing, that 2% or 5% is a lot more money with economic growth. So I guess my question is, how do you see economic reforms playing into the debate on national defense?
Okay, so please respond to these two questions, and then we'll collect.
There was several questions, to be honest. But the first about Russia, and of course, I would say officially, if you look in the strategic concept which was mentioned today, it's easy because head of states, they agree in Madrid that Russia is a threat. So for soldier who is fulfilling, following the rules, we say, well, politicians, they decided Russia is enemy number one, plus additional, terrorism and so on. So we go. And now we have a challenge because in the same time we have a negotiation table, which is in kind of a contradiction with the strategic concept. We have regional plans, which, successor, Chris Cavoli, he did a lot of work to have regional plans ready and scalable and well coordinated. So this is not question about the why or if the Russia is the enemy. From the other side, if you look in the Russian policy and strategic objectives, is anybody here believing that Russia is going to change the objectives, going west, finding, Ukraine, changing government in Ukraine, no borders lines, no NATO presence, and so on. So I never heard no single comment from Moscow saying that they're going to change objectives. If they don't going to change objectives, it's only matter what kind of instrumentarium they're going to use. And it goes to the point you asked me about the status of the Russian army. Of course, they're suffering a lot. A lot of Russian tanks being killed, or they're losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers killed in action, wounded in action, PTSD, and so on. But okay, if the objective is still the same, so Russia used different instrumentarium. So proxy, energy, sabotage, the political corruption, that's the Russian modus of operandi. So if you look at, to be honest, in Afghanistan, the Russian war, there was still Mi-24 helicopters, still BTRs, a T-72. Then you see Georgia, the same tanks, the same helicopters, more or less with some kind of modification. And then you see the Ukraine, or the Crimea, and then 2022. So it doesn't matter how many new supersonic stuff they have, or whether they lost 40% of bombers in the last Ukrainian attack. It's a matter of the Russian will. So I would say we still have to afraid of Russia and concern as a threat, because there's still the same policy and the same strategic objective. If the Russian policy is still the same and they have no enough tanks, they will prepare in the Baltic states, local attacks, sabotage, energy. Look in the Baltic, what's going on in the cables. They're cutting cables, and then destabilizing situation, and then trying to put the stick to the alliances. And finally, they are effective, politically effective. So I would not assess Russian army just only counting numbers of tanks and numbers of helicopters or airplanes, but looking in the strategic objectives, which are still the same. That would be my description.
Yeah, on Russia, I agree. First of all, from everything I can tell, Putin hasn't changed his maximalist objectives one bit. Two, they have a larger force today on the border and in Ukraine than they did in the day they attacked. Okay, so they've rebuilt. Now, those soldiers, like the 50,000 they just brought in, what appears to be maybe a summer campaign they're preparing for, my understanding is they got less than a month of training. The Russians are just feeding troops, and they're using attrition warfare. That's their way of war right now because, frankly, their capability in terms of command and control, gaining maneuver, etc., they don't have the trained troops or the leadership to do it right now. I don't think that'll get fixed until they can take a pause, frankly. That's why a ceasefire for them or an end to this result would be something we need to worry about because they know how to learn, and they will learn, and they'll rebuild. So I think that also Russia's here to stay. I don't think this is a problem that's going to go away in the short term or the long term even. So we need to be prepared for that. Yeah.
So if I may, because the lady, she had several questions. First, it was about the model of communication and education. It's difficult to say because I don't want to assess the German system. Maybe it works, I don't know, but I would be a little bit skeptical because they have a huge problem to communicate society importance and what I see, the facts, how they, political decisions from a very first day of war in Ukraine. I'm not sure whether that kind of communication and understanding is effective. So in Poland, we have pretty good situation when we have a political agreement, economical affordability, and social acceptance because we feel it. So Poland has a direct border with Kaliningrad, and we have a direct border with Belarus with, weaponizing illegal migration crisis. And of course, we're supporting very much Ukraine, taking all of the strategical risks, having a logistic hub in Rzeszów, J-Town, providing the support for Ukraine. So, of course, I'm agree. The first time in my life, Scap, for many years, first time I was in an all-inclusive, vacations with the family and in Tenerife. And I'm sitting in Tenerife and I'm asking, well, you're reading strategy. It's good, for retired generals. Looking around, they have, happy people and say, do they understand that we have a war in Ukraine? So the challenge for us, for intellectuals here especially, is to differentiate or keep in mind that if we say NATO, it depends. You're going back to 80s to Reforger, because in the Reforger time, there was no question about, take on, OPCON. There was a U.S. commander in Europe, nuclear policy, all of the divisions, all of the Radines, 1 hour, and every single tank was going to the position, and that was NATO, and this NATO doesn't exist anymore. So we just, discussing in Poland about the regional formats, which will not be alternative, but it will be something important, like 3 Cs. So Finland, or the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, those countries which were sharing the same perception of threat. And maybe we should, integrate more in the economical dimension, but also militarily, with the huge role of Poland, because, talking about GDP, Slavik has a saying, GDP doesn't kill Russian tanks. You need another tank or anti-tank missile. But if you look at the map, Polish GDP is equal to GDP of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. So it means huge responsibility on us how to connect transatlantic connection, but also play a significant role in the eastern flank, preventing, the Russia. So GDP is like a gentleman's agreement, 2%, 3%, 5%. But in the end of the day, it depends how you spend it. If you see the structure of GDP, how much you spend for modernization, for sustainment, for personal, and so on. So That will be my shortest answer.
Yeah, I would like to say something about NATO that doesn't exist. The NATO, the NATO.
This dimension, I mean, from
No, that's right. That's what I'm about to clarify. I mean, the NATO then of a standing force isn't there today, but NATO that is there today has a very, very good strategic plan for the defense of the transatlantic that's been developed over time, that's been adapted with what we're seeing in terms of the current fight. And what it has provided is provided now the force structure that's needed in order to fill out that plan and fight it, which NATO has not had since the wall came down. So the plan is there. We know what we need to do. We've got the structure to do it. We need to fill the capabilities out with the economic plans as we come out. That's why that money's important. But if we don't buy the right things with the money, then, you know, where are we?
I was allowed to take 2 more questions, so one here and one there.
Great, thanks. Steve Flanagan with Rand and Georgetown University. Yeah. Generals, I want to thank you both, and obviously the Ambassador also touched on a number of the key priorities for enhancing deterrence on NATO's eastern flank and realizing the objectives of the deterrence and defense strategy. One question that hasn't been addressed is the question, should Poland be, as a way to enhance its role as a key linchpin of deterrence on the eastern flank, be considering joining the NATO nuclear mission to take on, General Andrzejczyk mentioned the F-35s. Clearly there's an aircraft that's capable of doing that. Do you see some benefits, particularly as a response to Russia's move of nuclear weapons into Belarus and an effort to reinforce overall the message that NATO, as it keeps saying in its various summit communiques, remains a nuclear alliance? So thank you.
And yet another question.
Thank you. My name is Władysław Plaka, and I'm from Ukraine, student here in the United States. Right now for the summer, is going to work for Erasmus for Ukraine. And my question is, both of you mentioned about the importance of alliances and the importance of industrial innovation in the United States, so improvement of the production of missile tanks and so on. And so with recent report in Politico, it was said that in 2025 or 2026, Russia is going to come up to the manufacturing of around 600 to 700 ballistic missiles and like 600 of the X-101 missiles. And meanwhile, US can create only 600 Patriot missiles to intercept those types of ballistic missiles. And so with the importance of alliances, we can see that China, DPRK, Russia and Iran are stronger. And the question is, how can we ensure that Ukraine is going to have enough supply to deter Russian invasion? Thank you.
I'll take that one first. That's the point I'm talking about in terms of industrialization and development. You know, some of the key weapon systems that we need in the United States, we're only running one shift, an 8-hour shift today. Why aren't we running 3? More employment, we got to pump out those missiles, right? We got to start getting depth, because it's not just to supply what's needed today. It's to get our stockpiles where they need. Because if we get in a war, what we fire in 2 or 3 days, okay, we may have thought was 30 days at one time. So we're not, across the transatlantic, we haven't fully grasped the situation we're in and what it's going to take in terms of our magazine depth. So I agree with you. We need, you know, we just need to get up on step here. What was the other one?
Nuclear sharing.
Nuclear. Here's my thoughts on this. It is a nuclear alliance. And I think it's time that we had another discussion about the nuclear alliance and what that means, primarily because Russia, when they're conventionally weak, they're going to rattle their saber every time, right? In terms of their nuclear saber, they continue to do that. And so I think a discussion about that is needed. I think the fact that Britain and France are more open to supplying, in their view, an alternative for Europe, I think it ought to be worked in conjunction with NATO. It could be an alternative as well if for some policy reason it came to that. But in my thinking, to increase that capability in France and the UK, in addition with what NATO has, it just complicates Putin's problem. And that's a good thing when it comes to deterrence and never having to use it, hopefully.
Well, just to clarify, Scap, my understanding, the point of reference, NATO from 80s and today, it doesn't want to say undermining, you know, the importance. I am first to support but the perception of NATO as a structure, effective structure, like in the 80s and today is completely different. So we have to discuss whether we have the same understanding, and it's new, and NATO is effective anyway. So we won a Cold War and still the peace in Europe. So if there's a measurement, this is pretty effective, alliances. Nuclear issues, it's interesting. A few years ago, if anybody started to talk about nuclear, it was completely crazy. It was forbidden word. I remember many times in Poland when I started nuclear, I said, "Wow, you're crazy." So Scap probably he knows the most because he was someone having a nice suitcase with all of those codes, and then I started to visualize a little bit. So it's always surprised when we see 5,000 warheads in the U.S. more, and then 5,000 something warheads in Russia. A few it's like 300 only in France, and 200 something in UK, and 100 gravitation bomb B-61 in the nuclear sharing. You know what I mean? Which is not a long range, ballistic missile. Is gravitation bomb you have to put to the airplane, fly close to the target, drop the bomb. So this political correctness and a kind of delusion hit the point when we're talking about the nuclear sharing, 100 gravitation bombs comparing to all of those potentials, and everybody's paralyzed. So the Scap mentioned NATO is nuclear alliance. What I'm afraid most is the situation today. In the beginning of war, many capitals, there was a absolutely emotional shock when the Russia started deterrence effectively, because they say if any move, we just push the button. All of the Iskanders and are flying and hitting the targets. And then, if you reading carefully the Russian policy concerning how to and when they're using nuclear weapons, we have confusion. Because they said, if you take in any piece of territory of Russia, we push the button. Look in the Ukraine. Kursk was a good example. Can you imagine nuclear state having more than 5,000 warheads is occupied by, piece of terrain and seized by Ukrainian armed forces, no button being pushed. Then we have a situation, if you hit any elements of a nuclear triad, immediately is a case of war. Look at what the Ukrainians are doing. They're flying, across Russia with drones and killing Russian bombers. Those they attacking using the missiles you mentioned, civilian targets. So now we have a confusion whether Russian nuclear deterrence is credible. It's a risky game. But I would say Poland, again, going back to F-35 platform, Japanese F-35, Israelis and Polish, US, if we are in the nuclear sharing, it will be huge message to Russia because those platforms are capable to go deep into the territory of the opponent and hit the target. So I'm absolutely supporting the issue of taking into consideration, and also great if you see who says no, who gets no con. If we're talking about the nuclear sharing in Europe, Poland is absolutely for.
Just a footnote to what has been said. Alliance is about nuclear sharing, but also sharing responsibility and the risk. So if you want to have a stronger alliance, we have to accept the risks and the responsibilities, not only capabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a fantastic conversation between two great soldiers who sacrificed their lives, their time, their blood sometimes, for our common peace and security.
Sovek, if I may, just one more.
Let me. No, this time is my turn.
This is important.
So please join me in thanking them for their service and for their contribution to our common good, that is peace. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Spróbuj moich cukierków, Krzyśki, o smaku czekolada chili, dostępne tylko w sklepie SFD. Użyj kodu 0 i zamów taniej.
Partnerem kanału jest XTB. Aplikacja inwestycyjna, z którą zaangażujesz do pracy Twoje pieniądze.
Z kartą Zen zapomnij o elektronice, która psuje się zaraz po zakończeniu gwarancji.
Cechini muszyna. Naturalny magnez i wapń. Pij najlepsze minerały.
Partnerem kanału Zero jest producent boskich kiełbas bez osłonki JBB Bałdyga. Jedz bardziej bosko.
Najnowszy magazyn Zero już dostępny. Wyzwania władzy i polityki. Generał Rajmund Andrzejczak i profesor Sławomir Dębski o nowym prezydencie Polski. Zamów na magazyn.zero.pl. Kliknij w jeden z polecanych filmów, aby obejrzeć najlepsze produkcje kanału Zero.